In a recent interview, Donald Trump said he'd prefer a liberal over a conservative in charge of Canada, calling Pierre Poilievre no friend and claiming it would be easier to deal with Prime Minister Mark Carney.
One day after criticizing reporters over questions on conflicts of interest, Prime Minister Mark Carney admitted he will need to recuse himself from certain decisions.
Data shows that Saskatchewan has the top position in building construction and was second place in housing starts across Canada. Hello, Canada. It's Thursday, March 20th, and this is the True North Daily Brief. I'm Isaac Lamoureux.
And I'm Clayton DeMaine.
We've got you covered with all the news you need to know. Let's discuss the top stories of the day and the True North exclusives you won't hear anywhere else. In a recent interview, US President Donald Trump said he would rather deal with a liberal than a conservative in charge of Canada. Trump claimed that conservative leader Pierre Poilievre was, quote, no friend of his, and it would be easier to deal with Prime Minister Mark Carney. Trump made the comments on Tuesday during an interview with Laura Ingraham on Fox News. Regarding the growing tension over trade disputes between Canada and the US, Trump said he'd, quote, rather deal with a liberal than a conservative. He said, quote, I think it's easier to deal actually with a liberal, and maybe they're going to win, but I don't really care. It doesn't matter to me at all. He then took a direct jab at Poilievre, referring to his stance on the US president as, quote, negative. Poilievre responded to Trump's comment, inferring that the US president's endorsement of Carney made it clear that he is, quote, weak and would cave to Trump's demands. Poilievre reiterated his stance during a press conference in Sudbury, Ontario, Wednesday morning, saying that Trump prefers the Liberals in power because they will continue to keep Canada weak. Poilievre said, quote, after 10 years in power, the Liberals have given us the weakest economy in the G7. They've doubled their housing costs, driven $500 billion to the south, all while Mark Carney was an economic advisor to Trudeau, and while Mr. Carney moved his corporate headquarters to New York. So, Clayton, has Trump spoken about Poilievre in the past? What else has he had to say about the conservative leader?
At the end of February, Trump criticized Poilievre for his firm stance against Trump's use of tariffs and him calling Canada America's 51st state. This was right after Poilievre gave a Canada First rally in Ottawa, which felt like a campaign launch, where he took a strong stance against Trump's anti-Canadian sovereignty rhetoric. Trump said that he wasn't a fan of Poilievre, saying that Poilievre's biggest problem was that he wasn't a, quote, mega guy and that he wasn't a Trump guy at all. Trump said he doesn't care if Poilievre wins or not and isn't a fan of the things that Poilievre has been saying about him in response to his economic threats. I want to note his comments at the rally were about the substance of Trump's tariff threats and 51st state comments. Trump criticized Poilievre of making a big mistake by being a, quote, tough guy taking on Trump. He said everyone who thinks that they can knock him out gets the hell beat out of them. Poilievre ended up clapping back, saying, of course, he wasn't a Make America Great Again guy because his focus was on making Canada great and putting Canada first. Poilievre has called Trump's tariffs unjustified, but on the other hand said concerns over the border, immigration, fentanyl, and national security were shared concerns among Canadian conservatives. Just one day after lashing out at reporters for asking about potential conflicts of interest, Prime Minister Mark Carney admits he will, quote, probably have to recuse himself from decisions on certain files due to conflicts of interest. During a press conference on increasing defense spending in Iqaluit, Nunavut, Carney was grilled again about his potential conflicts of interest. He was asked if there were any files he would have to recuse himself from, like former Prime Minister Paul Martin had previously done when he led the Liberal government. At first, Carney answered a completely separate question, though he later admitted he had misunderstood the question posed to him in French. After pressure from the reporter, he admitted that he would have to recuse himself from certain decision-making conversations that touched on areas in which he was conflicted. Carney said, quote, my assets have been put in a blind trust well in advance of the requirements, so they've been disposed of. But what happens is that there's a discussion with the ethics commissioner for certain screens around certain issues, and that's a process that is underway. When asked why he didn't disclose those conflicts proactively, he deferred the responsibility to Canada's Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner. He added that the prior Conservative government set out the timeline he is abiding by, which Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre was part of, though Conservatives have called for the rules to be changed in light of Carney's likely conflicts of interest. Conservative MP and ethics critic Michael Barrett was in Ottawa Tuesday calling for Carney to disclose what assets he had that went into his blind trust before being sworn in as Prime Minister. Recent reports found that Carney held $6.8 million in Brookfield Asset Management stock options before quitting the company he chaired. Brookfield's annual report shows that Carney held over 209,000 stock options at $35.13 each and 200,000 options at $40.07 each on December 31st, 2024. He's entitled to $6.8 million in stock options until 2033 or 2034. Brookfield did not respond when asked if Carney had been paid those assets. So, Isaac, the question began comparing Carney's current position to former Prime Minister Paul Martin. What sort of assets did Paul Martin hold when he was Prime Minister?
Paul Martin served as the 21st Prime Minister of Canada and the leader of the Liberal Party of Canada from 2003 to 2006. The Globe and Mail published various articles on Martin's holdings during his tenure. The former finance minister and prime minister had business holdings that included movie theaters, office buildings, land holdings across North America, and a farm in Quebec. He also held interests in a bus company, an oil business, apartment buildings, a water slide park, a trucking operation, and investments in 4 movies. The Globe said at the time, in 2003, Martin was actually one of the most diligent MPs in regularly disclosing his holdings. Between 1994 and 2003, he filed 8 reports with the Office of the Ethics Counselor. Conversely, former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien filed 1 report, and former Finance Minister John Manley filed 3 as of 2003. When Martin was elected to Parliament in 1988, he put his holdings in a trust and later filed a 58-page report outlining his investments. Between when Martin first filed his report in 1988 and his report in 2002, his personal holdings diminished greatly as he divested many of them. The 1988 report included a listing of the Big Splash water slides at a Quebec ski resort, a third Vancouver movie theater, shares in an Albertan oil company, 66 beef cattle, 5 cars, 60 works of art, 22 multiple unit residential buildings, and $2 million worth of Power Corporation stock. The 2002 report included 89% of a shipping company, 100% of an Ontario company that owns treasury bills, 100% of another company with treasury bills, as well as mutual funds and bonds, 100% of a farm, and membership shares in some golf courses. Saskatchewan is celebrating leading the country in building construction and being the runner-up in housing starts. However, the day after Saskatchewan celebrated, the Conservative Party of Canada bashed the Carney-Trudeau Liberals for seeing national housing starts plummet annually under their reign. Saskatchewan issued a release on Tuesday highlighting that building construction investment increased by 27.2% in the province between January 2024 and January 2025. Housing starts in Saskatchewan saw a 115.7% increase between February 2024 and February 2025. The province's trade minister, Warren Clayton, said the 2 increases reflect the province's overall economic strength. The Saskatchewan government also celebrated its real GDP increasing to an all-time high of $77.9 billion in 2023, placing it second nationwide in growth at 2.3% compared to 2022. The province also saw the biggest increase in private capital investment last year and anticipates the second highest growth this year. However, while Saskatchewan celebrated its housing increases, the nation saw a decline. The Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation released data on Monday, showcasing that nationwide housing starts were in the red. Nationwide, housing starts fell 17% annually between February 2024 and 2025 in cities with over 10,000 people. However, housing starts decreased even more notably in Canada's most populated cities. Vancouver and Toronto, Canada's most expensive cities to buy a home, saw housing starts decrease 48% and 68% respectively between February 2024 and February 2025. Some smaller Canadian cities saw steep declines as well. Kelowna, London, and Halifax saw housing starts decline 67%, 58%, and 50% respectively. So, Clayton, the federal government has tried to use immigration to spur housing construction. Have these programs worked in any way?
Well, in 2023, Sean Fraser, Trudeau's immigration minister at the time, claimed that high immigration levels would help solve the housing shortages by filling labor gaps in construction. He said that the key setback developers were facing was a lack of access to the labor force. His solution, of course, was mass immigration. But data showed that the population growth spurred on by liberal immigration policies far outpaced housing completions. And you see this from ardent supporters of the Liberals' mass immigration programs over the years. And I've encountered this within the last few months. People saying Canada needs more immigration because of labor shortages in those fields. When True North wrote about this at the time in August 2023, it found that despite the surge in population, Canada lost nearly 45,000 jobs in construction in July of that year and 14,000 construction jobs in June. That's a reason why when Mark Miller was performing as Trudeau's immigration minister, he had to admit the previous minister on the immigration file made some mistakes, and the Liberals took a near 180-degree turn in rhetoric, pledging to lower population growth instead. That same year, the Bank of Canada also noted that while newcomers had helped loosen tight labor markets, the housing supply was not keeping pace with population growth, which contributed to heightened housing costs. Since then, the government has attempted to link its immigration measures to the needs of the Canadian market, such as in construction, subtly admitting that simply increasing the population won't mean needed markets are filled. But construction job growth is still not keeping pace with population growth in some instances. Still, there isn't a decrease in jobs, as was the case in 2023. In Ontario, for example, according to the province's construction secretariat, the labor market saw an increase of 640,000 people between the second quarters of 2019 and 2024, which accounted for an 8% increase in that time. Construction in the province saw only an increase of 7%, or 40,000 workers in that same period.
That's it for today, folks. Thanks for tuning in. You can stay on top of new episodes every weekday by subscribing to the Daily Brief on iTunes and Spotify. Also, while you're at it, make sure to hit us with a 5-star rating and please leave a review.